There are going to be groups targeting us, either queer folk, in particular, any families that are supporting their queer children, women who don't view themselves as baby factories, people all over the place willing to stand up to these challenges, provide necessary medical care. People are going to start being attacked. This stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. Frankly, because of that, I've come to the realization that it's necessary to condense a lot of information into a very specific format. So here I am. I am going to make zero judgments about your politics, about your beliefs in gun control before this, about any sort of positions that we might disagree on. I don't care. My goal is keeping people alive. And right now, in our community, that means getting dangerous. So here it is. I'm going to walk through getting people dangerous as quickly as possible. To start with, I have two things I want to cover. One, some ground rules for safety whenever you're handling a firearm. If you're going to be doing this, realistically, even if you're not going to be arming yourself, you're going to be around firearms at some point. You might be handed one in an emergency. You should at least know the basic 4 rules and have them down pat. You should also have a basic understanding of an order of events when you're handling an extreme medical emergency. So I'm going to give you some pointers on the basic structure of how to deal with somebody who is wounded, and the basic structure of how to interact with firearms safely. 4 gun rules, 4 simple gun rules. You follow them, you guaranteed aren't going to have one of the worst catastrophes. And if you do have a problem, you are breaking one of these rules. Follow these rules. A gun is no more dangerous than a hammer. 1. Treat every gun like it's loaded. Don't worry about being insulting to somebody. Checking a gun that has already been cleared is just best practices. Treat every single gun you are ever handed like it is loaded, just in case. Even if somebody says they cleared it, make sure whenever you are handed a gun, assume it's loaded until you have personally put eyes on the empty chamber. 2. Know your target and what's behind it. We are shooting projectiles that do damage by pushing holes into things. We shouldn't be that surprised when they are able to continue pushing on through the things we're shooting at. Knowing what's behind your target will prevent overpenetration wounding. 3. Don't point the gun at anything you don't want to kill. Assume if you are pointing a gun at something, you are fine with it being destroyed. Do not horseplay with guns. These are not toys. 4. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. While you are moving around, while you are running, anytime that you are not actually pulling the trigger, keep your finger off said trigger. This is the weapon I'm going to be teaching on later. For right now, what I'm going to be teaching you is how to clear this. This is the standard procedure for any time you interact with a weapon. Now, at the moment, this is empty. Now, part of the reason I can tell you definitively this is empty is because you can do what's called a press check. This is where put one hand behind the grip, keeping your hand well clear of the trigger, and the other hand goes onto the slide. Pull back, then look down into the chamber, and look down into the magazine. Doing this will tell you if there is any ammunition. In addition to that, you can just pull the slide back, and if it goes back and locks, that means it has locked on an empty magazine. Now, operated like this, it is essentially locked into clear. When you see a gun like this, you can assume there is no ammunition in it, or at bare minimum, it's not ready to pull the trigger. That said, you still want to visually confirm there's nothing in the magazine, as you can replace this with a loaded magazine, drop the slide, and now it would be loaded. Gun is still clear, to be clear. Many guns will have a safety on them. This one does. You can flick it up. That also renders the weapon safe and makes it so that it is no longer able to pull the trigger and produce a bang. If you want to make it extra clear, you can pull it back and lock that slide, and then there is a magazine release button over here where if you press it, it will release the magazine enough that you can pull it out. In this particular gun, you can press it and it will drop free. Other guns, you can press it and it will just lower it, and then you have to physically pull it out. It's important to know which your gun will do. This is a Smith & Wesson 380EZ. It will be showing up later. All you need to know for right now is if you want to be perfectly mirroring this series and going from 0 to 60 with an exact copy of what I'm teaching you on, that would be the 380EZ. That said, I'm going to try and make a lot of this apply to beginners, grabbing one of a variety of handguns. Now, to be clear, the rest of this isn't going to replace a proper Stop the Bleed course, but it should still contain a good general outline of what you should do in an emergency. Somebody gets hit. What do you do? First of all, tell somebody to call 911. Now, by that, I don't mean shout out to a crowd, someone call 911. Specifically look someone in the eye and say, you call 911. If you put it out to the crowd, there is always the chance of one of two things happening. Nobody calls, or everybody calls, and then there is a flood of inbound calls that restricts the immediate response time. Both of which are bad. You want to avoid both. Immediately find the wound. Remember, if somebody gets shot, there's also the possibility that there was either a ricochet or debris flying or something, and it isn't the same level of wound that you're originally looking for. That means you're going to need to find whatever is causing the bleeding. Bring EMS shears if you can. Worst case scenario, bring something that you can cut away clothing with, because it's really important that you see what the damage is. Clothing can always be replaced, limbs cannot. The first step with pretty much any bleeding wound is put pressure on the wound. Use bandages between your hands and the wound, and then use consistent pressure. If that stops the bleeding, then you can patch up using bandages. I'll have a whole other video on bandages. If, however, pressure doesn't stop the bleeding, your next call needs to be throwing on a tourniquet. I'm going to have a whole episode on how to properly apply one, but the important things to know is you throw it on as tight as you can. You use some kind of mechanical winch to, after you've made it as tight as you can, then cinch it significantly tighter, because you should be absolutely cutting off blood flow. That is the point of a tourniquet. Also important is, if you can, in any way, write down the time in which the tourniquet was put on, and if you can't, you need to go with that person to the hospital, and you personally need to tell the doctors when that went on. There is a hard 2-hour time limit from when that happens before you're doing permanent damage to the limb and the body. All bodies are weird. Your mileage will always vary. It's important to know when to use individual pieces in your kit. We're going to have a whole other video on putting together a first aid kit. The important thing to focus on for right now is you don't want to be doing more damage long term. You always want to be focusing on patching somebody up and getting them to a place where they can get proper care. A lot of that is going to mean deciding what you can and can't do, but also recognizing some stuff has to be solved right then. It's also important to note what functions are being effective. Air goes in, air goes out, blood goes around the body, and if any of those things are being affected, you need to fix that. If you see somebody has a wound in their chest, and the wound is bubbling, a chest seal is going to be necessary, because while you might not be able to fix that, you do at bare minimum need to prevent more air from going into that wound. We're going to be doing much longer medical episodes, but I think that is a good starting point. Those bits are enough to be figuring out the next steps. We have an entire episode coming in on putting together your own first aid kit and how to use most of the components in it. We've got an entire episode coming in on how to shoot handguns, how to shoot rifles, how to shoot shotguns. We've also got an episode coming in on how to think in a fight. We've also got an episode coming in about how to think like someone protecting a home. And we've got a couple episodes planned for how to function with community defense, work as a team, and shoot, move, and communicate effectively. Cool, that's it for me. I've been the Armorer, or Queer Armorer. Like, subscribe, all that traditional YouTube goodness. We're over on Twitch. This series is going to be ongoing, and I'm going to try and get these out as fast as possible. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. These names right here, seriously, they're making this shit a lot easier. That's going to be it for me, though. Stay dangerous, keep each other safe, and remember, moral doesn't mean legal, and Stonewall was a riot, y'all. Peace.